AAA gaming has become a huge problem. I think it's pretty inevitable at this point that entire chunks of the big budget gaming industry are about to implode. The corporate gaming world is in crisis at the moment, and whereas once this summit was a pinnacle of innovation and entertainment, it faces an avalanche of challenges that threaten its future. Today, the AAA landscape is finding itself eroding due to a myriad of factors, with major parts of this crisis stemming from escalating development costs and extensive production times to a lack of creativity and innovation. The industry is certainly struggling to maintain its former glory. So, how can things be going so very wrong? Well, some speculate that the self-imposed pressure to produce graphically stunning and technologically advanced games has led to a stale, repetitive, cynical cycle of similar releases, as seen with some of the embarrassing recent output showcased in the June gaming presentations. Additionally, the reliance on unpopular predatory live service models and dubious microtransactions directly against most consumers' wishes has shifted the focus from delivering the high-quality gameplay that players want to maximise revenue instead, more often than not, at the expense of player satisfaction. So, holding all of these pertinent thoughts, in this upload I want to explore the various factors contributing to the sad but arguably deserved decline of the AAA game industry, highlighting issues such as market saturation, players' expectations and economic pressures. Most would agree that 2024 is a complete show, and on that note, I am Lady Decade. Sit back, relax, and let's see if we can shed some light on why the AAA gaming industry needs to adapt if it wants to survive. The AAA game industry is, for some, the gilded epitome of innovation and success. For others, the embodiment of economic greed and creative bankruptcy. However, if we place facts over feelings, one thing is definitely true. This style of entertainment is now grappling with massive internal issues that threaten its very existence. While the path to the survival of these blockbuster budget games is unclear, I think we need to ask ourselves about the biggest issues the industry faces and what impact this will have. While these are all questions to ask, looking at everything, I think the conversation can be broken down into several main areas. So let's begin to tackle this mess thoroughly. An obvious starting point would be the widely held belief that AAA games have grown too big and excessively ambitious, resulting in mismanagement and a lack of cohesive vision. This problem is compounded due to an overabundance of decision makers being involved. You know what they say, too many cooks spoil the broth. Essentially, this means that when you have thousands of team members seasoning the same dish, it's not surprising when the end product comes out bland, tasteless or indistinct of any particular flavour. Also, on the subject of size, just because something is huge in scope doesn't necessarily mean it's going to deliver the best experience now, does it? It's true that many people believe that girth is more important than length anyway, so it's no wonder that so many people leave these experiences unsatisfied. Speaking of absolutely huge yet boring, this issue is particularly evident with open world games, which can frequently feature vast yet empty environments, which more often than not look absolutely gorgeous and rich, but end up feeling like absolute time wasters. It definitely seems that style is prioritised over substance with the more money that is thrown at a game. Some big examples of this game include Square Enix's Forspoken, with its richly decorated and expansive yet barren landscapes. Anthem, which promised to be a rich open world experience but instead delivered repetitive empty zones and NPCs with so little personality they might as well have placed signposts in their places. And of course, Fallout 76, which became infamous for its large world which felt utterly devoid of meaningful content and interactions, and didn't even have any available NPCs to talk to when it was initially released. What absolute disasters! Building on the problems, another significant issue is, of course, the skyrocketing production costs of AAA titles, something that is spiralling further and further out of control by the day. Unfortunately, the push for increasingly larger and more attention-grabbing games has sparked a vicious cycle of escalating budgets and prices. I know I am constantly bringing this up, but I hate how games now frequently cost $70 or more, with, in many cases, these price hikes are not being localized, rendering new releases unaffordable in many regions. When we consider that the cost of living has gone up across the board, most people are currently prioritizing essentials when making their monthly purchases, with exorbitantly priced video games continuing to be pushed down the list of importance. This evolving trend risks turning video games into a luxury item, potentially reducing sales and prompting further price increases. AAA games might be getting outrageously more and more expensive, but I know where to get thousands of video games for dirt cheap. Hundreds of you have been binge shopping, getting up to 90% off entire shopping lists of games using my Instant Gaming affiliate link via the pinned comment. Due to this, Instant Gaming has chosen to sponsor this channel for the 4th month in a row, so I'd like to give a huge thank you to all of you for that. If you grab some bargains, it supports my work simultaneously, so it's a win-win for both parties. Happy shopping. In addition to rising costs, publishers now increasingly depend on dreaded live service models to keep players engaged and spending beyond the initial purchase for quick wins to appease shareholders. This greedy, short-sighted approach, which includes microtransactions and constant content updates, often results in player fatigue and diminishes the overall gaming experience. For proof of how much this approach is dissatisfying customers, the unpopularity of this model is evident in the backlash PlayStation is currently facing for dedicating an entire third of their State of Play presentation to promoting Concord, their Zoomer shooter, which received widespread criticism. The video of this presentation received over 80% dislikes on YouTube. We don't want to go in this direction. Compounding this obstacle is the tendency of AAA games to mimic successful trends to ensure profitability, resulting in a lack of originality. They seem to believe that operating this way is the safe thing to do because when looking at the competition, they believe if they can succeed doing that, then so can we. This annoying trend chasing produces games that are often bland and devoid of unique identities, and then end up being completely abandoned. For example, Anthem attempted to replicate the success of Destiny, but failed to establish its own unique identity, while Ghost Recon Breakpoint borrowed heavily from popular mechanics seen in other successful shooters, resulting in a game that felt derivative. Then we have one of the most embarrassing attempts in my personal memory, Hyenas. That time, Sega made the extremely expensive title, trying their hardest to copy other Zoomer shooters like Fortnite, only to abandon it in the end completely. The allure of trying to siphon cash from teenagers wasting money on cosmetics cost Sega millions because everyone is trying to do it. While 2024 gaming is full of shortcomings and many of gaming's heavy hitters are devoid of personality, in contrast, the realm of indie games typically offers richer and more innovative experiences, making AAA titles appear uninspired by comparison. For example, games like Hades and Celeste demonstrate the creativity and originality that can flourish in the indie scene, offering fresh and engaging gameplay that stands out in the modern gaming landscape. Something else which is more often than not a massive hindrance is that many gamers will probably agree that the marketing of AAA games is much more often than not very misleading. AAA games receive very heavy marketing campaigns before release, with big publishers often promising us the world. Often so much money is spent on getting the word out, and so much hyperbole is spread that it's not uncommon for these practices to lead to disappointment, with the final product failing to meet expectations. This is unsurprising as gameplay itself doesn't often function as a major part of the marketing of these sought-after games. Instead, audiences are tempted by grand CGI trailers that do not actually even feature within the games. Rather than showcase how the games actually run, these cinematic sequences massively exaggerate the content of titles and exist purely to generate hype and drive pre-orders. Ultimately though, these often end up cultivating a cynical and jaded audience, continuing to compound the distrust and lack of consumer satisfaction that exists around AAA gaming. This is why I never pre-order anything. Adding to modern issues AAA is faced with is the massive fragmentation of culture. The entire goal of making the perfect AAA game seems to be designing an experience that is enjoyed by everyone, or at least as many people as possible. However, how is this possible when the term everyone is becoming applicable to a smaller and smaller market? It seems that the longer the internet has been around, the more and more entertainment choices we have been provided with. Gone are the days when we were forced to go to broadcasts, television and newspapers for our news and entertainment. Now we can access it from sources more aligned to your tastes through narrowcast content such as this very video you are watching right now. The point I'm trying to make is that I believe it's becoming increasingly difficult for AAA games to achieve universal acclaim, as more and more people are very aware of what they want from entertainment, more than any time ever before. As diverse and niche interests increase, it's becoming harder for game developers to create products that resonate broadly. This fragmentation reflects a shift away from traditional unifying values and common cultural touchpoints. As tastes become more bespoke, legacy media is slowly dying, so it's no wonder that AAA is on its way out too. Speaking of this problem, in an effort to cater to as broad an audience as possible, this includes studios often diluting their content to avoid offending any particular group. This approach only further exacerbates the problem of more and more bland and generic games existing. You know, the many titles that lack distinctiveness and fail to satisfy any specific demographic fully. Let's just say that there is a reason why everything featured in PlayStation State of Play all felt the same as each other. Many argue that this pursuit of universal appeal, driven by political correctness and an emphasis on diversity for its own sake, undermines the quality and originality of games, and believe that returning to a focus on traditional core gaming values with a willingness to take creative risks without pandering to every possible interest group could lead to more memorable and impactful AAA titles. But given that the goal is to appeal to everyone, no matter how unreasonable that goal is, don't expect much change in that regard. It's all a very sad state of affairs, and this dilution of content, combined with the AAA gaming industry's emphasis on larger, more costly and trend-driven games, has resulted in a massive decline in quality and innovation. Manipulative marketing and pandering to identity politics is making Western blockbusters feel more bland and samey than ever. Essentially, everything at the top looks and feels the same. Because it is the same. While the industry may not yet be entirely doomed, it certainly must adapt by learning from the success of smaller, more creative indie titles to steer clear of a self-destructive trajectory, as well as listening to gamers and doing more to deliver what is being asked, rather than focusing on trying not to offend people. What must be really starting to alarm the bigwigs is that now it's gotten to the point where the quality and value of AAA games have declined so much that it's making them less appealing at launch compared to many indie games. I'll even go as far as to say that I don't think it's wise or worth it in most cases to buy games on launch anymore. Just wait for the AAA disasters to lose most of their appeal in the first year and then pick them up for $5 from GameStop. Once the marketing budget runs dry, all of their value tends to disappear anyway, meaning you can try them out for cheap rather than wasting $70 of your hard-earned cash on soulless corporate rubbish. With so much choice out there now from both the worlds of indie gaming and gaming's past, it doesn't often feel necessary to want to buy these large, vacuous titles on day one. They frequently feature open worlds to justify their high prices, but as discussed earlier, these expansive environments can often be more of a hindrance than a benefit. When the open world fails to enhance gameplay and merely increases travel distances, it feels obstructive. It feels funny to say it, considering people used to complain about games like Final Fantasy XIII feeling like a corridor simulator, but with the way games are going now, I find myself craving games with a more linear narrative nowadays, as at least they are to the point, rather than intentionally designed to waste my time. But let's be fair, not all open world titles are bad. Successful open world games like my beloved Skyrim contrast sharply with titles like Watch Dogs, which feel empty and repetitive. The lack of meaningful exploration and the prevalence of formulaic missions like fetch quests and follow missions significantly detract from the overall experience. I mean, obviously you can get these in games like Skyrim too, but there is so much going on in that game that, for me at least, I never ended up feeling like anything was tedious, except for one massive mission I recall where I had to collect an excessive amount of mushrooms in Blackreach or something along those lines. See, that game was so good I'm struggling to remember clearly the one time it did annoy me. All I can say is that if more AAA games felt like Skyrim, I'd be a lot happier with the modern industry. Reverting back to the topic at hand, I mentioned earlier the prices of new games, but in many instances, many believe the high prices are often justified because of the improvements in things like graphics. But these marginal improvements in graphics do not really justify, in my opinion, adding much to modern experience, which couldn't be felt in games 10 to 15 years ago anyway. For instance, Cyberpunk 2077, despite its higher price, was a buggy mess at launch, unlike cheaper, more enjoyable titles like Stray, another game I absolutely adore. Indie games like this challenge the notion that high budgets are necessary for quality, providing compelling experiences at lower costs. I mean, seriously, did anyone play this game and think, yuck, I can't cope, I need to see more blades of grass to enjoy this game properly? By this point, the overemphasis on graphics is starting to feel a bit juvenile. But let's be fair, nowhere near as annoying as the predatory world of service models and microtransactions. Disgustingly and horrifyingly, it seems that microtransactions have supplanted core gameplay in many AAA games, particularly in sports titles from EA such as FIFA and Madden. Now, disclaimer here, I am not a fan of sports games. I never have been. But I do know that these games often recycle outdated gameplay mechanics and often retain bugs from previous versions. So let's be honest here, that's one of the reasons that they are able to release these games on a yearly basis. And while this strategy is profitable for companies, it severely diminishes the overall value of the games, as players end up paying for subpar experiences and additional content just to improve gameplay. But this issue extends beyond sports games to popular titles like Fortnite and other live service games. These games are designed to keep players engaged through continuous content updates and cosmetic items that require more and more additional purchases. While this model keeps the games financially viable and constantly evolving, it often shifts the focus away from delivering a complete and satisfying gameplay experience. Let's just say there's a reason why most older gamers can't even stomach trying this sort of game. While often free to play, the problem with most service games is that players can feel pressurized to spend money to stay competitive or keep up with the latest content, leading to frustration and diminishing the enjoyment of the game with each session. Obviously, I understand that games of this nature have a place in gaming, but they feel like they prioritise profit over player satisfaction, creating an environment where a relentless push for monetization overshadows the essence of fun. That, and I fully just think it's a shitty practice by our greedy corporate overlords manipulating the minds of literal kids. I mean, think of the children. Something else which happens way too much is that AAA games are frequently released in unfinished, buggy states. In fact, it feels like it's becoming less and less common that we are actually able to buy finished products on day one. Egregiously, the games as a service model encourages launching incomplete games that are patched over time, effectively using early players as beta testers. Early adopters of many of these billion-dollar products are usually treated like guinea pigs. What's worse is that the game is usually priced highest during its most incomplete state, with the game generally becoming cheaper and cheaper the older and more complete state it's in. Really, this should be considered completely and utterly unacceptable, as it's a disgusting practice and yet another reason we shouldn't be touching big budget games, at least in their first year anyway. I don't think it's unreasonable to want to purchase a finished product. As bad as many of the biggest games' beginnings are, as stated earlier, at least we have indie games, with, despite them having lower budgets, smaller and sometimes more experienced / self-taught teams, they still often deliver more enjoyable experiences than AAA titles. Games like Undertale and Stardew Valley really exemplify strong gameplay and unique voices, free from the too many cooks problem that plagues AAA development. These amazing indie titles prioritise well-tested gameplay loops and maintain clear, distinctive identities, offering refreshing alternatives to the often bloated and homogenised AAA landscape. For those seeking enjoyable gaming experiences, indie games and older titles from previous generations are often superior choices compared to new AAA releases. Generally speaking, indie games offer high-quality experiences at much lower costs, sidestepping the pitfalls of embarrassing unfinished launches, slimy microtransactions, and other ethical concerns. I feel that as we advance, we gamers should weigh in whether we prefer potentially disappointing AAA games or multiple satisfying indie titles. I know which ones I prefer. So, bearing this in mind, what can we learn from all of this? I for one feel that it's very clear that the AAA industry is certainly encountering significant challenges that pose serious threats to its future. For example, even the process of making games has changed drastically from even just 10 years ago, let alone 20 or 30 years ago. In the past, games were developed by small teams at relatively low costs. For instance, GoldenEye 007 for the N64, which is still considered to be one of the greatest games ever made, was created by a small team with a budget of $2.5 million. Whereas nowadays, in stark contrast, modern AAA titles require massive budgets and large teams, involving hundreds of developers working under intense crunch conditions. This shift has significantly increased the complexity and the cost of game development, pushing many projects into the hundreds of millions of dollars. The lack of diversity in gameplay styles at the top is continuing to dwindle, with more games competing for players' attention. It's becoming increasingly difficult for new titles to stand out. While the AAA formula is proving to be more and more shaky, what has to be mentioned though is that when it works, it works. It's becoming more and more high stakes, high reward. In my last video I mentioned how there are currently around 73,000 games available currently on Steam, including 14,000 new releases. Yet of these staggering 580 million game sales they made in 2023 alone, 61% of those were spread across just 10 games. 10 out of 73,000. What this demonstrates is that games now need to achieve extraordinary success to be considered profitable. As a result, many developers either cancel projects early or delay them indefinitely to avoid releasing games that might only achieve moderate success. This is why GTA 6 has been in the works for many years, but Square Enix hasn't shown any interest in giving us Sleeping Dogs 2. One thing is clear from all of this: due to their own doing budgets and hype machines, AAA developers now face immense pressure to meet heightened expectations, often leading to not only unhealthy working conditions, but also prolonged development times. The truth is, we need to have some kind of solution to be able to alter the course, because everyone is now starting to recognise that the industry has the potential to become a sinking ship. And it doesn't matter at the moment how many pails of water they toss over the side, it won't stop sinking until the holes have been patched. A solution is desperately needed. But really, what can be done? Some speculate that to remain viable, the industry needs to adjust its approach. One suggestion is to reduce budgets and focus on AA games instead that can be profitable without requiring market domination, which is something that many people are screaming out for. Like I said earlier, how many times can we be amazed by seeing additional blades of grass being placed in games? A strategy to produce fewer but higher quality games could potentially help sustain long-term player engagement, because focusing on quality over quantity can build stronger, more loyal fan bases and ultimately create a more sustainable and satisfying gaming ecosystem. Maybe there is some truth to this, considering how well the recent Nintendo Direct was received compared to the bloated presentation that PlayStation put out. At the end of the day, the AAA gaming industry is teetering on the brink of a significant crisis driven by escalating costs, prolonged development times, and a pervasive lack of innovation. Once the epitome of cutting-edge entertainment, the industry is now beset by numerous critical internal issues that threaten its future. This relentless pursuit of larger, more visually stunning games has led to a repetitive cycle of releases where new titles often fail to stand out amidst the competition. Moreover, the industry's dependence on unpopular live service models and microtransactions has shifted the focus away from delivering high-quality gameplay, resulting in player fatigue and incredible dissatisfaction. The challenges facing the AAA gaming industry are multifaceted, encompassing market saturation, inflated player expectations, and sustainable economic practices. The production of these games has become prohibitively expensive, with development budgets soaring to ludicrous and unprecedented heights. Furthermore, the industry's reliance on manipulative marketing and pandering to identity politics has diluted the distinctiveness of many titles, leading to a decline in both quality and originality. Indie games, by contrast, offer a refreshing alternative with their focus on creativity, innovation, and well-crafted gameplay experiences. Indie hits demonstrates that high budgets are not necessary for delivering compelling content. As the AAA industry grapples with its myriad issues, it would do well to learn from the successes of these smaller, more agile developers. The industry must adapt. Reducing budgets and focusing on smaller games that can be profitable without requiring market domination is a crucial step and would be a very popular move with gamers. Ultimately, the industry needs a radical shift in its development and marketing strategies, prioritizing quality and innovation over sheer scale and graphical fidelity. Without significant changes, the current model of producing big-budget, high-risk games is unsustainable. The future of the AAA gaming industry may depend on its ability to embrace these necessary adaptations, steering clear of a self-destructive trajectory and ensuring a more sustainable and satisfying gaming ecosystem. Don't forget that although AAA games are getting outrageously expensive, you can save up to 90% on thousands of video games right now using my affiliate link. But if you don't know where to start, I highlighted some of the best offers I found via these two videos, which you can click on right now. Happy shopping. See you later.